Alright, hello everybody. It is Friday, June 14th, and the topic today is going to be the Mercury Cazimi, which is about to take place. At the time of recording this video, Mercury is at 23 degrees Gemini, Sun is at 24 degrees Gemini, Venus is at 26. So the Cazimi has not quite started at the time of recording this, but it'll be happening soon. And the most important dynamic to consider, I think, is that Saturn and Pisces are in a square to this Mercury Cazimi. Saturn's at 19 degrees, Neptune is at 29 degrees, so it's not like a super, well, actually it's pretty close. I mean, that's a 5-degree square to Saturn. They're kind of right between, the Cazimi is like right in the middle of Saturn and Neptune, and at the time of recording this, the moon is in Virgo, creating a kind of T-square, which is really setting off this dynamic. Now, I'm just going to get into where I am at personally with this. I mentioned in my last video that I had been going through a process of doing therapy online, and I'll keep the details of exactly who my therapist I'm working with private. However, there's some challenge that I'm facing that, I've been keeping this whole process private, but I figure I'm going to include this in my video today because I'm running up against an obstacle, and that maybe by talking about it in this video, I'll be able to work through it a little bit. And basically that is that my therapist has recommended to me to basically give myself a break from living in this environment that I live in, even if that's only for the sake of going away for like a week or something like that, even very short term. Because I don't know if you guys picked this up. There's something about how I have been just in this is my bedroom at my parents' place, and I've been making these videos for a while now, and there hasn't been a lot of change in the like if you look at videos I was making a year ago, I've got the same position, the same framing, the same setup, and I'm like, there's this sort of sense of frustration, like especially with this bedroom. To explain a little bit more, is that before I started filming in my videos in this particular room, I was feeling frustrated about this environment, and I decided at least I would like rearrange the furniture in my room. Like I would change where my bed was, and I would change where my bookshelves were, and it's kind of maybe a little bit superficial, but just feeling like being really fed up with being stuck in this environment for so long. And to be clear though, is that I did live in a town called Nanaimo in Vancouver Island for a couple years, but then when eventually COVID hit, and then like a year after, in 2021, I came back here. And I am constantly feeling the town that I live in is not, there's worse places I could live, but there's something about the hometown environment, the environment with my family, that I end up complaining to this about my therapist, complaining about this stuff to my therapist, and he suggests that it would do me good to either take a little trip or go on a vacation or something. However, there's this whole problem with either my own confidence around traveling, or I was considering anyways that, like, just to keep it simple anyways, I could even just rent somewhere in the local environment where I live. Although the thing is, it wouldn't really, it's interesting because, like, I don't go, ever since COVID happened, I haven't been going to Vancouver, right? Part of where I live in the suburbs around Vancouver, and part of my whole lifestyle, my whole life would be previously anyways, with that, I live very, it's convenient to just go to the city and do stuff, but I don't do that anymore. And so like even maybe, but the thing is, it's like Vancouver is so bloody expensive. Like if you look at, I mean, they're putting in, I don't know, I'm getting maybe, I basically had this plan that if I was going to do this, there's a hostel at UBC in Vancouver, and I was considering, like, it's much more reasonable to rent this hostel at UBC than to, like, rent, I mean, if you're renting an Airbnb as, like, an apartment in downtown Vancouver, you're looking at, like, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, even more expensive than that just for, like, a week, right? There was a place in the downtown east side, which the downtown, this is like the extreme gentrification thing. Like somebody wants $9,000 for a shitty little like studio apartment for one fucking week on the downtown east. And this is supposed to be where all the lower income people live. It's like, it's completely nuts, right? And the thing about, okay, so, but I was considering with Mercury Cazimi, the same therapist is encouraging me to do, he likes my writing, he's encouraging me to do writing, so I was thinking that I could like go to UBC and with the intention, rather than it being like a vacation, but like a work project, to give myself a different environment, and then in this different environment do some writing, right? Or perhaps, and it could be all as an alternative. I could go to like the Gulf Islands, or I could go to Vancouver Island, or, but there's something about my attitude, or I don't know, I'm running into this obstacle with this, which could be indicated with the square with Saturn and Neptune, with like Saturn representing, the quality of stinginess, the quality of limitations or obstacles of like, wanting to do something on a budget, not wanting to spend money. Or, I mean, the whole thing, too, is that, like, I was also thinking, like, I've never been to the East Coast, to, like, Montreal, or, I mean, I haven't really even done much traveling in the United States or something like that, right? And if I was to go to Montreal, it would only really cost me, I'd probably pay a couple $100 for a plane ticket, and then the being able to rent a place wouldn't really be that, it might be cheaper even than doing the same thing in Vancouver, and it would be the added, there's this whole thing about like renting, like the thing about doing like renting out a place for a week in Vancouver is like, because I could easily just get on a bus and hang out in Vancouver without paying crazy amounts of money, it kind of has this effect of being like, seeming exceedingly pointless to just like why on earth am I gonna shell out a whole bunch of money just to hang out somewhere that, if I was interested in hanging out there, I'd already be doing it. I'm not even, and it's like, I've lived here my whole life. This place, I don't really care about there's no real perk or benefit, but it's mainly of like giving myself a different environment other than this sort of like this suburban small town parents' house dynamic to like create some movement, basically, to get me out of this thing where I feel really trapped or really stuck in, and just sort of create some movement to put me somewhere else, right? And then maybe, or I don't know, my therapist just thinks this would be good for me, right? But I'm running into this obstacle, which is either has to do with stinginess, or just feeling like it's kind of pointless, or like really not wanting to be in Vancouver or BC at all, and wanting, like, if it was up to me, I'd much rather go to like maybe like Byron Bay in Australia or something. But then again, there's this pressure with like, basically, like, I mean, there's all these people who don't believe in global warming, or don't believe in climate change, who don't believe in like carbon tax or any sort of restrictions, and I do feel like a certain pressure that I don't want to just carelessly spend lots of, or do all this like air travel stuff, just like, what am I going to do, fly all the way across the Pacific Ocean just to hang out somewhere for like a week or two? It seems like a waste of airplane travel to do that, right? And so I feel a certain kind of pressure not to just go jet setting around and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is, I have to admit that there's also this conflict where I was trying, like, by trying to do an astrology channel or trying to set myself up as somebody who does this kind of stuff, that the peer group of other astrologers, I'm not going to name names, but a certain friend of mine was doing this thing in Portugal, right? And I have to admit that I don't have anything, well, I'm not going to get into any, like, criticism of different astrological people that I know in the community or anything like that. But or the basic thing is my own pressure, basically, that I don't want to carelessly, you know, spend, well, okay, it's my own pressure to conserve my money and also conserve my impact on the environment, and be very mindful and conscious about how I'm doing this air travel stuff. But there's something about creating a channel, like, if you're being like an influencer, right? And the whole influencer personality tends to, like, there's this whole thing about being like the jet setting Instagram type, right? Where your Instagram account is full of all this imagery of a lifestyle that people want. The idea is that, like, if I'm a guy if I'm doing astrology, and regardless of whether I have talent or skill in being able to look at a chart and interpret it accurately and deliver to you as an astrologer some sort of insight based on what's going on in the dynamic, if I am really talented in doing this, but my own life is just me being frustrated about my situation, nobody's going to want to hire me, basically, as an astrologer. They're going to be like, why on earth would I want to hire some guy who's just frustrated and doesn't know how to use the astrology to make changes in his life to create a situation that he's more happy with, right? But then, if you look at the kinds of people that I have, that I've made friends online, of people who are maybe more established as, like, what you would call spiritual entrepreneurs, like, their whole lifestyle is being like these, like, jet-setting Instagram types where, like, hey everybody, look at me, I'm in Portugal today. Hey everybody, look at me, I'm in this great, like, resort in Costa Rica. I'm in Bali. I'm in Thailand. I'm meditating with the monks in the Himalayas. Like, you have to have, like, if you're doing all this stuff, people want to tune in every week and see what cool adventure you're on, and people are really excited for you having a good time. If you're just being like, hey everybody, I'm stuck at my fucking parents' house for 3 years in a row and I fucking hate it here, people aren't going to like that, right? So it's like, I'm under pressure by the medium. If I'm gonna be like some sort of, like, successful fucking trend-setting influencer, like, I'm not gonna be able to do it in this environment, right? But the thing, well, there's this whole question of, like, is that even what is right for me? Do I even want to be like a jet-setting Instagram influencer? Like, that kind of, there's something about that which kind of, like, you know, there's something it seems maybe a bit more right to me. Like, and I don't want to be too harshly critical of people, but it's like you have to start generate, like, it's expensive to do that in the first place, and never mind the whole, like, burning carbon and whether it's environmentally friendly and all this kind of stuff, but, like, you have to, like, it's like the idea is, by, like, getting yourself to be that popular, you have to, like, you can fund all your crazy adventures and trips because you generate all these people that are excited and happy to see you doing fun things like travel, and then those people are going to want to give you money so you can give them advice about how they can live a more fun and happy life, and then that creates your income that provides you to do all these things, and, like, maybe it creates a better vibe than just being this, like, me being trapped in this situation. But the thing is, there's nothing really, aside from it just being, I don't know. You can probably imagine a lot of people, like, I'm talking to my therapist, and he says if he just stays, whenever he visits his family, feels it's like normal to be frustrated being an adult, being stuck with your family, right? And I think those kinds of issues, this is the Saturn square, right? There's, like, the being frustrated with the conventional limitations, right? So I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of this video when I hit record. I wasn't specifically intending maybe to go in that direction, but that's the direction that I've gone in. There's something else about that I had in mind for this video, and the Mercury Cazimi and the square to Saturn and Neptune and Pisces. And that was basically, if you think about Mercury, right, and Gemini, having to do with the dialogue or the back and forth conversation, right? And there's something, a couple of videos ago, I was talking about basically how I don't like dating apps. And, you know, this is another thing. Part of the reason why I don't like dating apps is because I have, like, the whole dynamic with my, like, I basically, by dealing with people in my peer group, people in my age, and the general cultural attitudes that people have, that I have basically decided that if I'm in this situation living with my mother and my sister in this suburban home, that is not really conducive to dating, right? It's not really conducive to using dating apps and trying to in contrast to that, if I was one of these jet-setting Instagram types and I could like put on my dating app me in all these fun-looking places, going traveling and stuff like that, then that sets me up to being somebody who would find you know, that's what the whole app is catered for, right? This is like so you've got this sort of thing where you've got this like economy of people who like work day jobs, who do the daily grind, do all that kind of stuff, and then there's like some sort of like this other class of being like the trend-setting, jet-setting Instagram elite, where you make tons of money off of basically like grifting people to like support your like your expensive travel lifestyle or something like this. And it's sort of like I don't know, like I'm not. There's something about, there's this little voice. There's this, by looking at the whole situation, I start to question if that's really what my path is, to try to become like some sort of like the Instagram jet-setting influencer elite, right? But like otherwise, I'm just doing this thing where I'm stuck at like this ongoing thing of me being frustrated with my life circumstances, or also feeling basically like there's no point, you know, and this is the other thing. Like I was thinking about like booking the hostel at UBC and writing basically some kind of like manifesto, right? But what I've also realized is that the whole thing about, you don't want to be, what I want to avoid is like doing the kind of writing that is like the guy who self-immolated himself, takes himself too seriously, and writes this big manifesto that is really not really that spectacular. Like, it's like taking yourself too seriously, right? Like, I don't want to like take myself too seriously and be like, my manifesto is going to change the world, and I need to like, you know, make this thing, and I'm gonna like, you know, this is my message to the world, and I'm gonna like go out in a screaming crescendo of like kamikaze flames to deliver this sort of mediocre thing that is not even really that important, just because I'm a millennial white guy who's frustrated by living with his mom, basically, right? Like, I have enough insight into that situation to see that, you know, like that's not what my manifesto is going to be about. But you know, I've got the point. I'm being encouraged to write anyways. I'm being encouraged to. I might start a blog. You know, like I've been avoiding the Substack thing. But okay, there's something going on. There's another thing in these videos that I've been recording, and I was talking about my whole thing about the dating apps. After doing that, the algorithm in YouTube started giving me a lot of videos about a problem, like people commenting about something called Booktok, right? Which is people on TikTok talking about books, right? And I thought this was sort of interesting, but I'm not enough to really, you know, I have basically, there's this temptation anyways that there's a whole like basically things happen on one platform, TikTok, which triggers on YouTube there's this whole industry on YouTube which is basically people reacting to things on TikTok, right? And it's not just Booktok, there's also this thing called Witchtok. I think there may be other examples of different TikTok trends, and which spawned a whole secondary industry of people commenting on trends on TikTok. And basically there's a temptation to give into this, but I've just been avoiding TikTok in general in the first place, and there's something about how there's this whole the way this usually goes is that people will make a video along the lines of saying, don't believe this, or don't be misguided by all these people who are doing this, right? Or maybe, or like defending, like people are criticizing this, but I'm going to defend it, right? But there's something about like, this is like the Buckminster Fuller idea, right? Buckminster Fuller was talking about, this is during the era of the Vietnam War protests, that Buckminster Fuller, I'm also getting this from the John Cage and Morton Feldman interviews, where John Cage was making this argument for this Buckminster Fuller perspective, which was saying that rather, like, even if you don't agree or you have complaints or criticisms about certain things that emerge on TikTok, by creating a video where you're attempting to correct the mistakes that all these other people are making, what you are doing is essentially building more momentum for the thing that you are criticizing by making a video where people like me, I'm just avoiding TikTok. I wouldn't know about Booktok or Witchtok or any of these other trends if it wasn't for people on YouTube trying to make videos to comment on it, right? And so in some way, by being in reaction to this stuff, you are basically, it's like a snowball effect. You're not really stopping the snowball from gaining your momentum. You're actually contributing to the snowball getting bigger and bigger by the more you react. And there's certain channels that seem like the whole point of the channel. Like if you were to be like, take this channel and you can't talk about anything that's going on TikTok at all. You can't talk about any of those trends. There wouldn't be any content. The whole thing is just in reaction to what other people are doing on TikTok, right? And this is what I'm starting to realize, is that there's certain, I feel like the need, like if I'm making a YouTube video, that there's a certain center of gravity where my audience is, and I have to, kind of try to imagine what my audience is like, try to imagine where their center of gravity is, and then make content for them. And then, but there's something about, it's kind of like, you know what I'm saying with that force of gravity. Like imagine you are like getting pulled into the gravitational field of a planet, right? Like you're like a meteor or a comet or something like this, right? Like you're traveling through space and you're getting pulled into there's a huge center of gravity around this particular issue where people are talking about like the divine masculine and the divine feminine on TikTok. And it's the whole thing is like, I'm just gonna say, like, you could do a whole, you could spend hours and hours unpacking everything in a big video essay. But the point, like, I think it's better, basically, just not to watch TikTok videos in the first place, and accept that it's just inevitable that there are going to be a lot of people who are misguided or have the wrong idea, but instead of either watching TikTok videos or watching videos where people are reacting to TikTok videos and trying to correct the problem, most often, I think the videos where people are trying to correct the problem may not be, maybe they get some things right, maybe they don't, but it's still just piling up that snowball, right? So my whole attitude has been, don't watch TikTok videos. Don't, even the other ones are not even, instead just read books, right? Just so like just avoid all that shit entirely and read more books. And so then instead of being like in reaction to this thing that you're trying to correct, you're contemplating something that is a better nutritional value source for what your input is, right? And the other stuff, you can just omit it from your diet entirely and you don't even have to worry about it, right? And then from this position, there's this whole idea of like, the whole YouTube is often set up with this attitude of like, we are going to take things from that are more complicated, right? There's like the source material is complicated, and it takes certain time and energy to invest into like getting into the source material, and we are going to take this and explain it, right? And make it more accessible to the people, right? Now, I think, there's a certain trend online where people don't like, especially because I am a white male, that there's this problem with what is called mansplaining, right? And I have to admit that, like, even if it's stuff that I'm interested in, topics that I find interested in, a lot of these YouTube videos where it's just like there's some white, like, it'll be like, I'm some white, I mean, obviously, I can't get out of this because I'm a white guy, right? I am part of this demographic, so I'm going to run into this problem just like all the other white males on YouTube. We're going to run into it. But even the people that I like, right? So I can say, as a respectful criticism, there are going to be plenty of white males on YouTube that I like, that I find worth watching, that still fall into this problem, which is basically because I have some sort of superior position, being well read, being well understood, and there are all these poor people, the implication is that they're probably women who are being misguided by things on TikTok. That is my job as being a sophisticated, well-read white guy to there's all these books that you're probably not going to read because it's too complicated for you. So it's my job to put on this sensitive and thoughtful demeanor and explain and make all these really hard things easy for you to understand, because it will just hurt your brain. You'll just get overwhelmed. You'll try to read a few pages and then you'll run. I need to look at TikTok now, and now TikTok is, you know what I'm saying? It's so it's my job to run to like there's this crisis, right? The world is afflicted by bad information and misunderstanding, and it's my job to be the heroic white male to rescue all you poor misguided women from your TikTok apps that are misguiding you and confusing you, because and they're also degrading your attention span, so you wouldn't be able to read books if you tried, right? Or the Booktok thing, that the books that become trendy are somehow degrading the moral fiber of society. And so it's my job as the white male who knows better to basically explain, to try to take all these things that are really way too difficult for you and then break them down into friendly, kind of like bite-sized, digestible sizes, and then you can all like join my Patreon because you're so appreciative of what I'm trying to do for you, right? And I just you just have to see that temptation. Like, my approach is to see that temptation and say, no, we're not going to do that. Let's do what everybody else may be doing that. We're going to do something different here. We're not going to do that at all. If you want to read the books, go read the books, right? And there's this kind of problem too of the inversion of that is rather than trying to I'm just kind of thinking, like, if you look, see how that whole movement works of like, um, rather than trying to take things which are complicated, break them down so that they're more accessible, like to create like the Cliff Notes version or create some easily digestible way so that you don't have to waste your time on all this complicated books and these stressing yourself out about complicated things you don't understand. Just leave it to me, the superior white male, to do that for you, right? Instead, what we can do is like take things which seem like they're simple and make them more complicated, right? Like, do the exact opposite, right? And this is what I'm thinking about Gemini and Mercury, Cazimi, in that square to Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, is that, I mean, also, I mean, if you want to get into the details, the Saturn is a superior square, right? Because the idea is that you have to travel 10 signs. It's on the 10th, right? That Saturn is in the overcoming square to Gemini. So basically, this Mercury Cazimi is getting its ass kicked by Saturn right now, right? So there's a sort of like weight, a lead weight of difficulty, or it's also the frustration of dealing with ignorance and stupidity and stuff like that. But there's something about like, instead of trying to like make the difficult stuff more accessible or more simple to understand, we can take things which should be simple and easy to understand and make them more complicated, right? Or which is like, you may wonder what the point, why would on earth would anybody want to do that, right? Because it's really just going against the grain of what everybody else is doing. So this is another one of my long, thoughtful pauses where I'm just sort of contemplating the whole issue here. Um, there's there's something else that comes to mind in that yesterday I watched this video from a podcast called Theorize and Be Damned, and I thought it was kind of interestingly relevant because they were talking about I mean, this is a political thing, right? And there's something going on where in the year 2024, I'm like, even, I'm probably even late to the party, because there's something about what has been going on ever since Donald Trump was first elected back in whatever it was, 2016, that there was a certain thing that opened up called the post left, right? And it took me a while to really like figure out what the deal was, and I think that's possibly due to my own circumstance of being kind of isolated, or just being stuck in this dynamic where I live at home with my family and in a kind of socially isolated environment, and I just have to figure it out by talking to people on the internet. Although, I mean, the whole thing about the alt-right, I mean, how many, I don't have to get into that, right? But there's this issue, like, on that podcast, they were the guy on it was specifically talking about the writing of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, And it just so happens that like these are some of the guys that I have been reading. Although I don't necessarily, Nietzsche seems like somebody who has a bad reputation that I don't want to associate myself with. So I've been avoiding bringing him up on the astrology channel. But there is some there basically there he in this maybe I'll link it in the comments. There's this whole issue about Dostoevsky as being this person who is like a criticism of the left because he started off being involved in like left-wing socialist groups, and then it was like out of his actual experience in that he was kind of transformed into somebody who is more of a I don't know if you'd call him conservative, but he was basically more in favor of the sort of Orthodox Russian defender of the Orthodox Russian status quo, rather than being in support of socialism based on his experience with it. And I'm not, in my own position, that's not exactly the direction that I'm going, but I think there's something about the whole problem with both Dostoevsky and Nietzsche that highlights this issue. But one of the rather than I could use this video to unpack the issues of that particular dynamic with Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and being post-left, and but there's something going on with that dynamic. When you factor in the climate, right? Basically the idea of what I'm saying is that people on TikTok, if you look at what books are trending on Booktok, or this whole thing, that there's this what I'm trying to say, this center of gravity, this gravitational field of all these people who are doing stuff on the internet in a certain way. It could be another gravitational field of people who are reading Nietzsche books or reading Dostoevsky novels or something like that too. But there's something about the idea of there's some it's better I've made the decision anyways to avoid doing something where I'm trying to take this stuff and make it more accessible, to take these things to take rather than spending all this time reading Russian novels, I will try to get a few juicy bits and then turn that into something that you can have in your TikTok video and get a little hit of it, and then you can try to position myself as somebody who does I'm not going to do that, right? And the whole point is I'm not going to, if somebody has a question about it, then maybe with the Gemini Mercury thing, I can answer a question, or I can have an actual dialogue with people, but I'm not going to be basically creating a video where I'm just explaining something into a void to some audience that probably doesn't care about it in the first place, right? Although it's interesting though, because it's created this interesting situation with my family, because it's kind of it's sort of I don't even know. I wouldn't be able to approach these conversations with them there's no avenue for me to even bring this up, right? So it's kind of creates a situation where it's I just have to I read books, and I'm not gonna be this person who's trying to use the stuff that I'm reading to put little bite-sized little things to feed people on the internet. And I'm not going to get into any conversation about it with my family, right? So but my therapist is encouraging me to do more writing. I might start a Substack, right? But there's this issue about there's something about there's the way that the family dynamic works, and about how it's just kind of a no-brainer that I'm not going to try to talk to my mom and my sister about like why Dostoevsky decided not to be a socialist. It's just like it's like one of those things where it's like you have to, like back when I worked in retail, there was this whole attitude like the customer is always right. Right? Like, there's something about, like, even if you disagree with your family, it's probably just better not to go into those disagreements. You just gotta, like, have to let sleeping dogs lie and just not talk about, 19th century literature in that context, right? And then, so, like, and then there's certain things that were like, so there's this kind of thing where I'm sort of developing away, maybe developing in this direction of like the post left or being beyond the left and being influenced by Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, but I don't really know where that dialogue or that conversation is going to have to happen, and it's sort of like I also feel like I need to like hide or not engage people on the online around because it seems like even if I try to like, it's like I'm just going to get in trouble if I try to talk about this online too. And I don't really understand because it's like it's in a certain place where it's like I'm probably going to piss off leftists and conservatives and liberal, like there's probably going to just alienate myself from everybody. It gives me this sense. I think this also has to do with the Mercury Cazimi square to Saturn, because Saturn rules the opposition, right? Saturn is basically like an antagonistic. It's the malefic, greater malefic. It's the like. There's a sort of thing with Zeus and Saturn where Zeus is like good cop, bad cop. And like Saturn is like the antagonistic, grouchy old man to the generous, altruistic, divine providence of Zeus, right? There's something about the Saturn squaring Mercury Cazimi where it gives me the sense that like that I have the stuff that I would have, like I have to do this thing where I'm going to have to write a blog, and I'm not going to try to avoid doing the self-immolation suicide note manifesto where I'm so frustrated I'm just gonna write it all out and light myself on fire. No, I don't want to do that kind of writing. I don't want to feel like I'm in so much pressure. Like there's so much pressure because like people are the era of mansplaining is over. Right? People don't want some white male guy who thinks he's superior to tell you what you're supposed to think. So, but this is actually, when it comes to reading Friedrich Nietzsche, this may be a bit like an added perk because, some of the stuff that Nietzsche writes about is pretty fucked, right? And it doesn't make for, like people are gonna like if you even get into these conversations, if you try to bring up the things Nietzsche's talking about, people are gonna want to like fight you probably, right? So it may be that if you're under an injunction not to explain people, it may actually be safer not to explain this stuff to people, right? So you can kind of just like, but it creates a situation where there's a whole line of thought or line of conversation that is like Deleuze and Guattari would say, a line of flight away from what I can bring up at the dinner table with my family, a line of flight away from what I can post on Facebook, and I don't even know if I write in a blog, what's going to happen, right? But there's a sense of, and there's also, in the midst of all this, there's this sense of like people feeling like their freedom of speech is under threat, right? And like we've had all these protests about Palestine and Israel going on, and people, the right to protest and the right to express your beliefs and opinions and all this kind of stuff. And you know what? I'm not a Palestinian refugee. I'm a white guy, and I have my own house that I can live at. I'm not like a refugee who's being pushed out to I'm in a privileged position, right? But in this privileged position, it creates a situation where nobody is interested in what you have to say. Nobody wants to hear what privileged white guys have to say. So it creates a situation where we just read Friedrich Nietzsche and we don't talk about it, right? Which is to our advantage because it may just make a problem trying to talk about it, right? So so my idea, anyway, is in this whole this all these circumstances, there is some sort of thing. There's something left, like an idea which is not being expressed, which I will either try to maybe start a blog, a Substack to express these things. But the point is that, like, I also run into this problem with Facebook, right? I mean, I don't even know if it's, like, maybe it's just redundant to try to explain it, but there's also there's a whole thing about, one of the main issues around this whole thing about, like, the post-left and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and the whole thing about being a privileged white guy or whatever. There's this like, in the kind of the spaces online, especially in that, like, there's this whole, like, when I first started getting more into Deleuze, I really pissed a lot of people off. There were a lot of people who did not want me to read Deleuze, and this basically was like fuel for the fire, right? Like, I'm this kind of attitude where if somebody tells me not to do something, it makes me want to do it more. If there's some sort of if there's some sort of, like, there's all these books, right? Like, all these certain things that you could possibly read. I know it's true, though, that maybe some people might say, don't read Deepak Chopra or something, right? Because Deepak Chopra is just a bunch of fluffy new age woo-woo stuff, right? You know, I mean, I have to admit that doesn't necessarily, I haven't been that motivated by that kind of antagonism to go in that direction, right? But there's something about when you start getting into Deleuze and Guattari, there's such a like, people are furious that you'd even think about going in that direction. Like, people are like, and there's something about that motive, like the people who don't want me to read those books, I don't vibe with them in the first place. I don't, like, there's something about that sets me. If the person that you don't like really doesn't want you to read something, then those two things cancel it. They kind of, like, go together. Like, this guy bugs me, and this guy really doesn't want me to read this author. This is probably a sign that maybe I should read an author to find out what specifically this guy doesn't want me to be reading, right? And however, that has this problem where it will just increase the antagonism with that guy, right? And that, there's something about the whole atmosphere about anything which is considered intellectual, right? Which is and it has to do with the idea of equality versus, like, superiority, right? And I'm not, like, the idea that, like, everybody's opinion is valid, everybody has the right to express themselves, everybody is, you know, nobody's point of view is better than another person's point of view, nobody's perspective is privileged over another perspective, we're all kind of on this even kind of playing field, right? And the problem about, like, people really don't like it if you start reading something that's more complicated. And this is what goes with the Saturn squaring Mercury, right? The Saturn stands for things that are difficult and that there's a barrier, right? And Saturn could also stand for the limitations, like intellectual limitations. Like, there are people who are going to just tune out, that don't want to listen because what you're doing is too complicated or too abstract or too intellectual for them, and they see it as being elitist, right? They see it as being part of this privileged elite, and that if you're going to do something in the name of equality, then you have to make it accessible for everybody. You have to make it simple enough that everybody understands it. And if you're getting into things that are it's just part of the territory, that it's more complicated, that's not accessible for everybody, that even by doing that, what you're doing is you're you're withdrawing from the common man and putting yourself on a pedestal of elitism. And what I'm starting to realize is that in itself is a kind of a post-left move, right? Because the whole idea of the leftist thought is they want to make a public community that's accessible for everybody, that everybody has the same access to, that where no perspectives have any sort of leverage over the other ones. But this creates an attitude of like, it's kind of funny because some leftists can actually be very intellectual, right? But it creates this attitude of like a contradictory anti-intellectualism, because if you try to do something that is considered too smart, they think you are like a privileged elitist and you are, against the working class and you're counter-revolutionary and all this kind of stuff, right? And this is kind of like, I guess I will confess this much and explain to you people. I mean, it's an hour-long video, so if you watch this far, you have to be invested enough to pay attention to you have to have enough free time on your hands that you're going to watch an hour-long video in the first place. But the basic idea is that the idea of not making it accessible to anybody and seeing that there is an actual value of having certain perspectives that are leveraged above other ones, or that are inaccessible, or that there is a reason to not have everything on an even level playing field where everything just gets flattened out to this basic level of socialism, right? But the thing is, I'm still in favor of things like having public health care. I don't know. I don't want to apply this idea to like health. I think it's better to have a situation where if somebody needs medical attention, that's available for everybody. So it's not like you're on some sort of life or death situation where you're gonna die unless you can hustle a whole bunch of money, right? But that's not the same as like trying to make everything out there reduced to being like a TikTok video and being like, we're gonna have TikTok be or something like this, like some sort of like junk food social media being like, if you think you're better than that, then you're just like some elitist snob, and you're like there's something about this attitude where you have to make everything conform to this sort of where everybody is at. This is the whole thing. Why I've been doing a little bit more posting on social media, but I have to admit that like if I spend like more than 5 minutes on Facebook, I feel like I'm getting dumber. I feel like it's rotting my brain away, and I live with my family, and I just see my mom, like, I don't know what she's doing, but she's just like, their eyes are glazed over, and she's just in this sort of like, the hours are ticking by, and like the scroll on the phone, and it's just like, I thought at one point in time I had, I could just be the thing where you don't idealize your family anymore, you don't idealize your parents, but I just worry that like, my family, and by extension the community, the world around me, are becoming a bunch of fucking morons because their brains are rotting out from just like they don't live their life in real life. They live their life on social media, and it's geared in a way that it makes everybody really fucking stupid, right? And there's to the point where it's like, they're not capable, like, if I'm gonna write something, it's gonna piss people off because people are gonna think that I'm gonna think I'm better than everybody because I'm reading things that other people aren't reading, or that they're gonna think that I'm like, have a superiority complex because I'm expressing myself in a different way than other people, or they're gonna think that I'm like, I'm a little, I'm too much of a snob just to get a fucking working class job and like push the lawnmower like all the other, Joe Schmoes or whatever like this, right? This is the whole thing. This is kind of attitude of like, you're supposed to be, you're not supposed to get too big for your britches. You're supposed to just be like just fall in line with what all the other morons are doing. And like, if you, the whole thing about the problem about living in Vancouver, BC, is that anybody with half a brain gets hired to go to the States. Like, if you have any talent, if you have any ability to make money, like you're an entrepreneur, you've got a good idea, you're gonna go down to fucking LA or Silicon Valley. You're not gonna live in Vancouver. So the problem is like, I'm basically in a community that's full of a bunch of fucking idiots. Because if you had a brain, you wouldn't be here. You'd be somewhere else doing something that were people to actually pay you for your talents, right? So you're basically left in a country full of a bunch of fucking morons who are getting preyed on social media by the most bullshit garbage, right? Like, so it's like there, and there's this conspiracy to like, if you're making any effort to like not succumb to this level of idiocy, people like ostracize you and criticize you, you know, or like you end up pissing off both people. You piss off both the left wing, because like then the right wing's upset at you because you're not just gonna fall in line with their ideology either. I don't know. So this is these are my thoughts going into the Mercury Cazimi square to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. I'm basically expressing where I'm at with this right now. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.